When 8-year-old Maya tugged on her father's sleeve outside the downtown coffee shop, pointing at the woman huddled against the brick wall, CEO David Chen felt something shift inside his chest. The woman's eyes held a familiar emptiness, the same hollow look he'd seen in his own mirror during those dark months after his wife's death. Maya's small hand was already reaching into her backpack, pulling out her favorite granola bar. "Daddy, that kid looks so cold," she whispered, mistaking the frail woman for someone younger. In that moment, David realized his daughter was teaching him how to see again. Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe and leave a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The rain had stopped, but the sidewalk still gleamed under the streetlights like black glass. David Chen adjusted his grip on Maya's small hand as they walked past the row of boutique shops and cafes that lined Fifth Avenue. The air smelled of wet concrete and the lingering aroma of coffee from Grind, the little shop they'd just left. Maya skipped beside him, her unicorn backpack bouncing with each step, steam still rising from the hot chocolate, clutched in her free hand. At 8, she moved through the world with the kind of unburdened curiosity that David envied. Everything was worth examining, worth questioning. "Daddy, look at that lady." David's eyes followed his daughter's pointing finger to a figure hunched against the brick wall of the old Paramount building. The woman sat with her knees drawn up, a thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Even from a distance, David could see she was young, probably in her 20s, though the harsh lines around her eyes made her look older. "Don't stare, sweetheart," David said automatically, the words coming from some parental autopilot he'd developed since Sarah's death 2 years ago. But Maya had already stopped walking. She stood perfectly still on the sidewalk, studying the woman with the intense concentration she usually reserved for her art projects. "She looks cold, Daddy." David glanced at his watch. 7:30. They needed to get home for Maya's bath and bedtime routine. He had emails to review before the morning board meeting, presentations to finalize. The familiar weight of responsibility pressed against his chest. "Come on, Maya. We need to get you home." But Maya wasn't moving. She was digging through her backpack, her small fingers searching through the organized chaos of colored pencils, hair ties, and snacks. "Maya." She pulled out a granola bar, her favorite kind, the ones with chocolate chips that she hoarded like treasure. "Can we give this to her?" David felt something tighten in his throat. The woman was maybe 30 feet away, close enough that he could see the way she held herself carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter something vital. Her clothes were clean but worn, layered against the October chill. A small backpack sat beside her, along with a cardboard sign that David couldn't quite read from where they stood. "Honey, we don't know. Please, Daddy. She looks hungry." There was something in Maya's voice that stopped him. Not the whining tone she sometimes used when she wanted something, but something deeper. A certainty. David looked down at his daughter. Maya's dark eyes, so much like Sarah's, were fixed on the woman. Her small face was serious, focused in a way that reminded him of Sarah when she was making one of her decisions, the kind that couldn't be argued with. He thought about the speech he'd given at the company retreat last month. Something about corporate social responsibility, about being good citizens. The words had felt hollow, even as he'd spoken them, carefully crafted by the PR team to hit the right notes. "Okay," he heard himself say. Maya's face lit up. She clutched the granola bar tighter and started walking toward the woman, David following a step behind. As they got closer, David could make out the cardboard sign, "Anything helps. God bless." The woman looked up as they approached, and David was startled by her eyes. They were green, clear despite everything, and held a wariness that spoke of too many disappointments. Maya stopped just in front of her, holding out the granola bar. "Hi, are you hungry?" The woman stared at Maya for a long moment. David watched emotions flicker across her face. Surprise, caution, something that might have been gratitude. "That's very kind of you," the woman said. Her voice was soft, educated. Not what David had expected, though he wasn't sure what he had expected. Maya smiled, and placed the granola bar on the blanket beside the woman. "It has chocolate chips. They're really good. Thank you." The woman's eyes moved to David, studying him briefly before returning to Maya. "What's your name?" "Maya. What's yours?" "I'm Rachel." David felt like he was watching this interaction from outside himself. Maya crouched down to Rachel's level, seemingly unaware of the damp concrete soaking through her jeans. "Do you live here?" Maya asked, with the direct curiosity of a child. "Maya," David started, but Rachel held up a hand. "It's okay." She looked at Maya steadily. "I'm staying here for now, just until I figure some things out. Are you by yourself?" David watched Rachel's face carefully. The question seemed to land somewhere tender. "Yes, just me." Maya nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. "We're by ourselves too. Just me and my daddy. My mommy died." The words hit David like they always did, unexpected and sharp, even though Maya had been saying them for 2 years now. She delivered them with the matter-of-fact tone children used for difficult truths. Rachel's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. It's okay. Daddy takes good care of me. He makes really good pancakes, and he reads to me every night, and sometimes when I have bad dreams he lets me sleep in his bed." David felt heat rise in his cheeks. The intimacy of Maya's revelations, shared so freely with this stranger, made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite name. "He sounds like a good daddy," Rachel said. "He works really hard though. Sometimes he falls asleep on his computer." Now David was definitely blushing. "Maya, maybe we should— Do you have a job?" Maya asked Rachel. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Her fingers worked at a loose thread on the blanket. "I used to. I was a teacher. 3rd grade. I'm in 3rd grade. What happened to your job?" David saw Rachel's jaw tighten slightly. The wariness crept back into her eyes. Sometimes, things just change. Maya seemed to consider this. David could see her processing the information, filing it away in whatever internal system she used to make sense of the adult world. "Are you going to be okay?" Maya asked. The question hung in the air between them. David found himself genuinely curious about the answer. Rachel looked at Maya for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was careful, measured. "I think so. I hope so." Maya nodded. She stood up, brushing off her knees. "I hope so too. Maybe we'll see you again." "Maybe," Rachel said. As they walked away, David felt Maya's small hand slip into his. They walked in silence for a block before Maya spoke. She seemed sad. Yeah, she did. But nice sad. Not mean sad. David wasn't sure what the distinction meant, but something about it felt right. "Why doesn't she have a house, Daddy?" The question David had been dreading. He thought about the easy answers, the ones about choices and circumstances and systems too complex for an 8-year-old to understand. But looking down at Maya's upturned face, those answers felt insufficient. "I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes life gets complicated for grown-ups. Like when Mommy got sick?" David's throat tightened. "Yeah, like that." They reached their building, a converted brownstone in the arts district that David had bought when the company went public 3 years ago. The doorman nodded as they entered, and they rode the elevator to the 4th floor in comfortable silence. Their apartment was warm and bright, decorated with Maya's artwork and the remnants of the life he and Sarah had built together. Photos on the mantel, Sarah's books still on the shelves, her coffee mug, the one with the chip in the handle that she'd refused to throw away, still sitting in the kitchen cabinet. David helped Maya with her bath, listening to her chatter about her day at school, her friend Emma's new puppy, the book report she was working on. Normal, everyday things that felt precious in their ordinariness. After he'd tucked her into bed and read 3 chapters of Charlotte's Web, their current bedtime book, Maya looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "Daddy? Yeah, baby? Can we bring Rachel some food tomorrow?" David smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "We'll see. I think she's really hungry. And lonely." What makes you think she's lonely? Maya was quiet for a moment, thinking. Her eyes looked like yours did after Mommy died, before you started smiling again. The observation hit David like a physical blow. He sat on the edge of Maya's bed, studying his daughter's face in the soft glow of her nightlight. Is that how I looked? For a long time. But not anymore. Now your eyes smile too, not just your mouth. David felt something crack open in his chest. He leaned down and kissed Maya's forehead. I love you, kiddo. I love you too, Daddy. Can we help Rachel? We'll talk about it in the morning. But after Maya fell asleep, David found himself standing at his bedroom window, looking down at the street below. He couldn't see the corner where they'd met Rachel from here, but he found himself thinking about her green eyes, the careful way she'd spoken to Maya. He thought about what Maya had said about his eyes after Sarah died. He remembered those months when everything felt muted, like he was watching his life through thick glass. Maya had pulled him back, eventually. Her needs, her laughter, her stubborn insistence on joy, even in the midst of grief. David opened his laptop, intending to review the quarterly reports for tomorrow's meeting. Instead, he found himself staring at the blank screen, thinking about Rachel sitting alone on the cold sidewalk. He thought about Maya's granola bar, offered so simply, so freely. He thought about the weight of small gestures, and whether they were enough to matter. Outside his window, the city hummed its nighttime song, traffic and sirens, and the distant sound of music from the bar on the corner. Somewhere in that maze of streets and lights, Rachel was trying to stay warm, trying to stay safe. David closed the laptop and got ready for bed, but sleep didn't come easily. He lay in the dark, listening to the building settle around him, thinking about teachers who became homeless, about 8-year-olds who saw the world more clearly than their fathers. Thinking about tomorrow, and whether small gestures could add up to something larger, whether they could add up to hope. The morning came gray and drizzling, the kind of October day that made Seattle feel like it was wrapped in wet wool. David stood at the kitchen counter, watching Maya methodically pack her lunchbox sandwich, apple slices, juice box, and 2 granola bars instead of her usual one. Just in case we see Rachel again, she explained, without looking up. David poured his coffee and checked his phone. 17 emails since midnight. The board meeting was at 9. The quarterly review at 11. Lunch with potential investors at 1. His day was mapped out in 15-minute increments, color-coded and optimized. Daddy, can we walk the long way to school? The long way takes us past where Rachel Island. Maya zipped her backpack and looked at him with that serious expression that reminded him so much of Sarah. Please? David glanced at his watch. They'd need to leave 5 minutes earlier, which meant less time to review his presentation notes. But Maya was already putting on her jacket, and there was something in her deliberate movements that told him this wasn't a request. Okay. But we can't be late for school. We won't be. They walked through the drizzle, Maya's small umbrella bumping against David's, as they navigated the morning foot traffic. The city felt different at this hour, softer somehow, still waking up. Street vendors were setting up their carts, shop owners hosing down sidewalks, the early commuters moving with purpose, but not yet the frantic energy that would come later. As they turned onto Fifth Avenue, David felt his shoulders tense. Part of him hoped Rachel wouldn't be there, that whatever circumstances had led her to that corner had resolved overnight, that she'd moved on to something better. But she was there, in the same spot, wrapped in what looked like a different blanket. This one was blue, heavier. Someone else's kindness, David realized. Maya was already veering toward her before David could say anything. Hi, Rachel. Rachel looked up, and David was surprised to see something like relief in her face when she recognized them. Hi, Maya. Good morning. It's raining, Maya observed, as if Rachel might not have noticed. A little bit. Are you wet? Rachel pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I'm okay. Maya crouched down beside her, oblivious to the drizzle soaking through her jacket. I brought you another granola bar. And an apple. She pulled both items from her backpack. Daddy says apples have lots of vitamins. That's very thoughtful. Rachel accepted the food, her fingers careful not to brush Maya's. Thank you. David found himself studying the details he'd missed the night before. Rachel's hair was clean, pulled back in a neat ponytail. Her clothes were worn but not dirty. She had a small solar phone charger attached to her backpack, a water bottle that looked relatively new. Did you sleep okay? Maya asked. Rachel's smile was tired but genuine. Well enough. I didn't sleep good. I kept thinking about you being cold. David felt that familiar tightness in his chest. Maya's empathy was sometimes overwhelming in its purity. You don't need to worry about me, Rachel said gently. But I do worry. Daddy says that's what people do when they care about each other. David saw Rachel's composure crack slightly. She looked down at her hands. Your daddy is a smart man. He runs a big company. They make apps that help people find things. Maya, David said quietly. He didn't like her sharing personal information, though he wasn't sure why. Rachel hardly seemed threatening. What kind of things? Rachel asked. Like if you're lost, or if you need to find a bathroom or a place to eat. Maya's voice was animated now, proud. Daddy says technology should help people solve problems. Rachel's eyes found David's. There was something measuring in her gaze. That sounds useful. What kind of problems did you solve when you were a teacher? Maya asked. Rachel was quiet for a moment. I helped kids learn to read. And sometimes I helped them feel safe when home wasn't a safe place to be. The words hung in the air. David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. That's important, Maya said seriously. I thought so. Why did you stop? David saw Rachel's jaw tighten. The wariness was back in her eyes. Sometimes good people get blamed for things that aren't their fault, Rachel said carefully. Maya seemed to consider this. Like when Emma's mom got mad at me for breaking the vase. But really, it was Emma who knocked it over. Something like that. But didn't you tell them the truth? Rachel's smile was bitter. I tried. But sometimes, people don't want to hear the truth if it's complicated. David found himself leaning forward slightly, drawn into the conversation despite himself. Maya, we should get going. You don't want to be late. 5 more minutes? Maya looked between David and Rachel. Please? Rachel spoke before David could answer. Your daddy's right. School is important. Maya sighed but stood up. She looked down at Rachel with that intense focus again. Will you be here after school? I don't know. I hope you will be. As they walked away, David felt Maya's hand slip into his. They were quiet for a block before she spoke. I think someone was mean to Rachel. What makes you say that? The way she looked when I asked about teaching. Like when Bobby Martinelli talks about his dad. David knew about Bobby Martinelli's father, the custody battle, the restraining order, the careful way the school handled pickup arrangements. People have complicated lives, sweetheart. But she's a good person. I can tell. How can you tell? Maya was quiet, thinking. She listens with her whole face. And she didn't lie when I asked hard questions. Grown-ups who lie look different when kids ask hard questions. David was startled by the observation. Maya was right. Rachel had answered every question directly, even when the answers were clearly painful. They reached Maya's school just as the first bell rang. David kissed her goodbye and watched her run toward the building, her backpack bouncing with each step. She turned back once to wave, and David waved back, feeling the familiar mixture of love and worry that came with watching her disappear into her own world. The drive to his office took him back down Fifth Avenue. He slowed as he passed Rachel's corner, and before he could stop himself, he pulled over. She was reading a paperback book that looked well-worn. When she saw him approaching, she carefully marked her page and looked up. Mr. Chen. David, please. She nodded. David. He stood there for a moment, feeling awkward. In his world, every interaction had a purpose, a goal, an agenda. This felt different. Maya was worried about you sleeping in the rain. She's a special kid. Yeah. She Island. David paused. Look, I don't want to overstep. But there's a diner around the corner. Would you like some breakfast? I mean, a real breakfast. Rachel studied his face carefully. Why? The question caught him off guard. I don't know. Because Maya would want me to? Because it's cold and wet? Because... He stopped, realizing he didn't have a good answer. Because you feel guilty? The directness of it stung because it was partially true. Maybe. Does it matter? Rachel considered this for a long moment. I suppose not. Yes. Thank you. I would like some breakfast. The diner was warm and bright, filled with the breakfast crowd, construction workers, early commuters, a few other people who looked like they might be living rough. David and Rachel sat in a booth by the window, and David found himself studying her in the better light. She was probably in her late 20s, with the kind of refined features that spoke of good genetics and, once upon a time, good care. Her hands were clean, her nails trimmed. Whatever had brought her to that sidewalk, it was relatively recent. She ordered eggs Benedict and coffee. Real coffee, not the bitter stuff from the gas station. David watched her savor the first sip, her eyes closing briefly in what looked like genuine pleasure. When did you last have a real meal? He found himself asking. Define real. Sit-down restaurant. Hot food served on actual plates. Rachel thought about it. 3 weeks? Maybe 4. Jesus. It's not that bad. There are places, soup kitchens, shelters. But they have rules. And sometimes, the rules make things. She paused, searching for words. Complicated. What kind of rules? Rachel's eyes sharpened. Are you always this curious about strangers? I'm not sure. I don't usually talk to strangers. But your daughter does. Maya talks to everyone. She's fearless that way. No. Rachel said quietly. She's trusting. There's a difference. The food arrived, and David watched Rachel eat with careful precision, not rushing despite what must have been real hunger. She had good table manners, the kind that came from careful upbringing. You mentioned you were a teacher. 3rd grade, Whitman Elementary. David knew the school. It was in a rough part of town. The kind of place where teachers bought school supplies with their own money and stayed late to tutor kids whose parents worked multiple jobs. How long? 5 years. What happened? Rachel's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully. There was a student, 8 years old, like Maya. She came to school with bruises sometimes. Flinched when adults raised their voices. The classic signs. David felt something cold settle in his stomach. I reported it, multiple times. Followed protocol. Documented everything. But the family had money. Connections. The father was some kind of city contractor. Rachel's voice was steady, but David could see the tension in her shoulders. When CPS finally investigated, somehow I became the problem. The troublemaker. The teacher who couldn't be trusted to handle sensitive situations appropriately. What did they say you did? Nothing. That was the point. They didn't have to accuse me of anything specific. They just let it be known that I was difficult to work with. That I made people uncomfortable, created unnecessary drama. David recognized the tactic. He'd seen it in corporate settings, the quiet assassination of someone's reputation, done with whispers and careful non-accusations. So, you lost your job. Eventually. Budget cuts, they said. Last hired, first fired. But I couldn't get hired anywhere else either. Amazing how quickly word spreads in a small education community. And the child? Rachel's face went carefully blank. Still with her family, as far as I know. The weight of it settled between them. David thought about Maya. About the trust she'd shown Rachel yesterday. About the careful way Rachel had answered every question. The patience she'd shown. I'm sorry. For what? For what happened to you? For the system failing that kid? For... He gestured vaguely. All of it. Rachel picked up her fork again. I made a choice. I knew what might happen when I kept pushing. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. So you lost everything for trying to protect a child. I lost my career, and my apartment, and most of my friends, Rachel corrected. But I didn't lose everything. I still know who I am. David studied her face. There was steel beneath the exhaustion, a core of something unbreakable. How long have you been? Homeless? She said the word without flinching. 2 months. Maybe 3. Time gets weird when you don't have schedules to follow. Family? Parents died in a car accident when I was 20. No siblings, no husband, no kids. Turns out being completely independent isn't as liberating as I thought it would be. David thought about his own safety net, the money, the connections, the board members who would make calls if he needed them. The privilege he'd never had to examine too closely. What do you do all day? Rachel gestured to the book beside her plate. Read. Think. Try to figure out what comes next. She paused. Watch people like your daughter remind me that there's still good in the world. Something about the way she said it made David's chest tight. Maya asked if we could help you. She did? Last night, she said, you looked lonely. Rachel was quiet for a moment. She's very observant. What would help look like? I mean, if we wanted to help, what would actually make a difference? Rachel studied his face carefully. Are you asking because Maya wants you to, or because you want to? David considered the question honestly. Both, I think. Most people who offer to help want to feel better about themselves. They want to throw money at the problem and have it go away. Is that what I'm doing? I don't know. What are you doing? David realized he didn't have an answer. He'd asked the question impulsively, driven by some combination of Maya's compassion and his own discomfort with the situation. I'm trying to figure that out. Rachel nodded, as if this were the answer she'd expected. Well, at least you're honest about it. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence. David paid the check and walked Rachel back to her corner, feeling strange about the goodbye. Like there should be something more, some gesture or promise or plan. Thank you for breakfast, Rachel said. Thank you for talking to Maya yesterday. She doesn't always get to meet adults who take her seriously. She's easy to take seriously. David found himself hesitating. Will you be here tonight? When Maya and I walk home? Rachel looked at him steadily. Probably. I don't have anywhere else to be. As David drove to his office, he found himself thinking about choices and consequences. About systems that were supposed to protect people, but sometimes crushed them instead. About 8-year-old girls with bruises, and 20-something teachers who sacrificed everything to try to help them. By the time he reached his building, his quarterly presentation felt like something from another world entirely. The board meeting was a disaster. David had given the same quarterly presentation dozens of times, but today, the numbers felt abstract, disconnected from anything real. When board member Patricia Kellerman asked about user engagement metrics, David found himself thinking about Rachel's careful way of eating breakfast, the dignity she maintained even when accepting help. David? Patricia's voice cut through his distraction. The retention statistics? Right. Yes. David clicked to the next slide, but the charts and graphs seemed to blur together. Up 8%, quarter over quarter. Which you mentioned already, said Board Chair Robert Martinez, his tone carefully neutral but his eyes sharp. Are you feeling all right? David forced himself to focus, to channel the professional competence that had built his company from a 2-person startup to a $50 million acquisition target. But even as he fielded questions about market penetration and revenue projections, part of his mind kept drifting to a corner of Fifth Avenue, where someone was trying to stay warm. After the meeting, David's assistant Karen knocked on his office door. The Goldman team moved lunch to 2:30, she said, setting a stack of contracts on his desk. And Maya's school called. She's in the nurse's office with a stomachache. David was already reaching for his jacket. Tell Goldman we'll need to reschedule. David, this is the 3rd time we've... I know, Family emergency. Karen's expression softened. She'd worked for David since before Maya was born, had helped coordinate meal trains when Sarah was sick, had quietly rearranged his schedule around grief counseling sessions in those first months after the funeral. Is Maya okay? I hope so. The drive to Maya's school took 15 minutes through downtown traffic. David found her in the nurse's office, sitting on the examination table and swinging her legs. She looked pale, but not sick. Hey kiddo, how are you feeling? Better now that you're here. David studied his daughter's face. Mrs. Patterson says you threw up in math class. I did. But I think it was because I was worried. Not because I was sick. Worried about what? Maya's eyes darted to the nurse, who was organizing supplies in a cabinet across the room, pretending not to listen. Can we talk in the car? David signed Maya out and buckled her into her booster seat. She was quiet until they were several blocks from school. I kept thinking about Rachel being hungry, she said finally. And cold. And I couldn't concentrate on fractions, because I was wondering if she was okay. David felt that familiar tightness in his chest. Sweetheart, you can't worry about every person who's having a hard time. It'll make you sick. But she's not every person. She's Rachel. And she's nice. And she used to help kids. And now, nobody's helping her. David pulled into a parking space and turned to face his daughter. Maya, there are systems in place to help people like Rachel. Social services, shelters, programs. Then why is she sleeping outside? The question hung between them. David thought about his conversation with Rachel that morning, about rules and complications, and the ways systems sometimes failed the people they were meant to serve. It's complicated. Everything's complicated with grown-ups, Maya said with the exasperation of an 8-year-old who saw the world in clearer terms than the adults around her. But helping isn't complicated. Helping is easy. Is it? You give someone what they need. Food if they're hungry, a warm place if they're cold, someone to talk to if they're lonely. Maya looked at him with Sarah's eyes, Sarah's certainty. Why do grown-ups make it so hard? David thought about his morning, the board meeting, the investor lunch, the careful balance of profit margins and market strategy. About the distance between his world of apps and algorithms and Rachel's world of cold sidewalks and uncertain tomorrows. What do you want to do? He asked. Can we bring her dinner? Like a real dinner? From where? Home. You could make your spaghetti. The one with the sauce that takes all day. David considered this. His famous spaghetti sauce, Sarah's recipe, actually, passed down from her Italian grandmother. He hadn't made it since before Sarah got sick, but Maya was right that it was good. The kind of meal that felt like love made edible. That's a lot of food for one person. Then we should eat with her. Maya, we can't just... David stopped. Why couldn't they? What rule said they couldn't share a meal with someone who needed it? Okay, he heard himself say. Really? Really? But first, we need to ask Rachel if she wants company for dinner. They drove to Fifth Avenue, and David found himself parking in the same spot he'd used that morning. Rachel was there, reading the same book, but she looked up when she saw them approaching. Shouldn't you be in school? She asked Maya. I got sick because I was worried about you, Maya said with characteristic directness. Something flickered across Rachel's face. You shouldn't worry about me. That's what Daddy said. But I can't help it. Maya crouched down beside Rachel. Are you hungry? I'm okay. But are you hungry? Rachel smiled despite herself. Yes, Maya. I'm hungry. Good. Daddy's going to make his special spaghetti, and we want you to eat it with us. David watched Rachel's expression carefully. Surprise, wariness, something that might have been longing. That's very kind. But it's really good spaghetti, Maya interrupted. It takes like 6 hours to make the sauce, and Daddy puts all kinds of secret ingredients in it. Maya, David said gently. Let Rachel think about it. Rachel looked between them, her green eyes unreadable. You don't know me, she said quietly. We know enough. Maya said, with 8-year-old certainty. Maya's right, David found himself saying. We know you're kind to children. We know you sacrificed your career to try to protect a kid who needed help. We know you're hungry and alone, and we have food and company to share. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. David could see her internal struggle, pride warring with need, caution with hope. Why? She asked finally. David thought about the question. The honest answer was complicated, tangled up with grief and guilt, and his daughter's relentless compassion. Because my daughter is teaching me how to see people again, he said, and because everyone deserves a good meal and conversation sometimes. Rachel looked at Maya, who was watching this exchange with intense focus. What do you think, Maya? Really? Are you sure you want a stranger in your house? You're not a stranger, Maya said matter-of-factly. You're Rachel, and yes, I'm sure. David saw the moment Rachel's resistance cracked. It was subtle. A softening around her eyes, a barely perceptible relaxation in her shoulders. Okay, she said quietly. Yes. Thank you. Great. Maya jumped up. We need to go to the grocery store first. Daddy always forgets to buy the good Parmesan cheese. As they walked to David's car, he found himself wondering what he was doing. His world was carefully controlled, predictable. His home was his sanctuary, the place where he and Maya had rebuilt their life after Sarah's death. Bringing a stranger into that space felt like stepping off a cliff. But watching Maya skip beside Rachel, chattering about the secret ingredients in the sauce, David realized this didn't feel dangerous. It felt right, in a way he couldn't explain. The grocery store was surreal. David pushed the cart, while Maya and Rachel walked ahead, discussing the merits of different pasta shapes. Rachel moved through the aisles with the careful attention of someone for whom food was precious, not taken for granted. At the cheese counter, she stopped. This is too much, she said quietly to David. What is? All of this. The expensive cheese, the wine you just put in the cart. I can't. She struggled for words. I can't pay you back for this. David looked at her steadily. I'm not asking you to. But people don't just, what? Feed each other? Care about each other? David paused. Maybe they should more often. Rachel's eyes were bright, and David realized she was fighting tears. I haven't been in someone's home in months, she said. Well, you're in for a treat. Maya's turned our living room into an art gallery, and I'm pretty sure there are stuffed animals having a tea party in the kitchen. Daddy, Maya called from the produce section. Do we need garlic? Lots of garlic. David called back, and Rachel laughed a real laugh, surprised and genuine. The sound made something in David's chest loosen. Back at the apartment, Rachel stood in the entryway for a moment, taking in the warm chaos of their home. Maya's artwork covered the refrigerator and most of one wall. Books were stacked on every surface. A forgotten game of Monopoly was spread across the coffee table. It's beautiful, Rachel said, and David could tell she meant it. It's messy, he said. No. It's lived in. There's a difference. Maya gave Rachel the grand tour while David started the sauce. He could hear them in Maya's room, Maya explaining her elaborate dollhouse setup, Rachel asking questions with genuine interest. When they returned to the kitchen, Rachel asked, "Can I help with anything?" David looked at her, this woman who'd been living on the streets, offering to help prepare dinner in his kitchen, and felt something shift in his understanding of dignity. Can you make a salad? I think I can manage that. They worked together in comfortable silence, the kitchen filling with the smell of garlic and herbs. Maya set the table with her special occasion plates, the ones with flowers around the rim that had been Sarah's favorites. Tell me about your company, Rachel said as she chopped vegetables. We make location-based apps, help people find things, restaurants, parking, services they need. Maya mentioned you think technology should solve problems. I try to. Though lately I'm wondering if I'm solving the right problems. Rachel glanced at him. What do you mean? David thought about his morning presentation, about user engagement metrics and revenue projections. I spent 2 hours today discussing ways to increase user retention on an app that helps people find expensive restaurants. Meanwhile, there are people like you who can't find basic services they need to survive. Those are different kinds of problems. Are they? Or are they just problems that affect different kinds of people? Rachel was quiet for a moment, her knife moving steadily through a tomato. You could build an app for people like me, she said finally. What would it do? Find safe places to sleep. Locate food services that don't require proof of address. Connect people with social workers who actually have time to help. She paused. Map the places where someone living rough can use a bathroom or charge a phone without getting hassled. David stopped stirring the sauce. That's actually brilliant. It's also not profitable. Maybe it doesn't need to be. Rachel looked at him with surprise, spoken like someone who's never been hungry. The observation stung because it was true. David had never been more than temporarily inconvenienced by anything. His problems were things like board meetings and investor presentations, not finding a place to sleep or a bathroom to use. You're right, he said. I don't understand what it's like. But I could learn. Most people don't want to learn. They want to help in ways that make them feel good, not in ways that actually change things. What would actually change things? Rachel set down her knife and looked at him directly. Address the reasons people become homeless in the first place. Build affordable housing. Fund mental health services. Create job training programs that don't require people to already have stable housing. She paused. Believe people when they report abuse, even when the abuser has money and connections. The last comment landed like a weight between them. I'm sorry, David said. About what happened to you? About that little girl. Are you? Or do you just feel sorry for me? The question was sharp, challenging. David thought about it carefully. Both, I think, but mostly, I'm angry that a system I've never had to think about failed someone who was trying to do the right thing. Rachel studied his face for a long moment, then nodded as if he'd passed some kind of test. Anger's more useful than pity, she said. Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway. Is dinner almost ready? I'm starving. Almost, kiddo. As they sat down to eat, David watched Rachel take her first bite of the spaghetti. Her eyes closed briefly, and he could see her savoring not just the food, but the experience sitting at a table, eating off real plates, being part of a family dinner. This is incredible, she said. Daddy's a really good cook, Maya said proudly. Mommy taught him. Your mommy must have been a wonderful woman. She was, Maya said simply. She would have liked you. David felt his throat tighten. It was true, Sarah would have liked Rachel, would have admired her courage, her integrity, would have brought her home for dinner without a second thought. Tell me about her, Rachel said gently. And so they did. Maya told stories about Sarah's terrible singing voice and her obsession with rescue dogs. David shared memories of Sarah's fierce protectiveness, her inability to let injustice slide, the way she'd made their small apartment feel like the center of the universe. She sounds like someone who would have been angry about what happened to you too, David said. Rachel smiled. I think I would have liked her. They lingered at the table long after the food was gone, talking and laughing as the rain continued to fall outside. For a few hours, the apartment felt complete in a way it hadn't since Sarah died. When it was time for Maya's bath, Rachel stood to leave. I should go. It's still raining, Maya pointed out. I'll be fine. But you don't have to be just fine, Maya said with the logic that only children possessed. You could be warm and dry instead. David found himself speaking before he'd fully thought it through. You could stay. Just for tonight. The couch is comfortable, and tomorrow we can figure out next steps. Rachel looked between them, her expression carefully guarded. I don't want charity. It's not charity, Maya said. It's friendship. Friends help each other. Maya's right, David said. And besides, I could use your help with something. What? That app idea you mentioned. I'd like to know more about it. About what people really need. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, weighing something David couldn't quite read. "Just for tonight," she said finally. "Just for tonight," David agreed, though something in his chest suggested it might be more than that. As Maya splashed in the bathtub, chattering about her day, David found Rachel standing at the living room window, looking out at the city lights. "Second thoughts?" he asked. "About staying?" "No." She paused. "But I keep waiting for the catch. For the moment when you realize what you've done and ask me to leave. What would the catch be?" "I don't know. That's what makes it scary." David stood beside her at the window, looking out at the rain-soaked streets. "For what it's worth, you're not the only one who's scared. What are you scared of?" David thought about it honestly. That Maya's getting attached to someone who might disappear. That I'm making promises I can't keep. That I don't actually know how to help in any meaningful way. Those are reasonable fears. Yeah, well, my daughter is teaching me that reasonable fears aren't always worth listening to. Rachel smiled at that. She's pretty wise for 8. She gets that from her mother. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city settle into night. Somewhere out there, David knew, other people were looking for safe places to sleep, warm places to wait out the rain. The thought that had been abstract that morning now felt personal, urgent. "Rachel? Yeah? Tomorrow, will you tell me more about that app?" "Really?" She looked at him, searching his face for something. "Yeah," she said finally. "I think I will." From the bathroom came the sound of Maya singing off-key, something about friendship and rainbows. David and Rachel listened, and for the first time in months, David felt like his family might be growing instead of just surviving. David woke at 6, to the sound of quiet movement in the kitchen. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, he thought it might be Sarah, that the past 2 years had been some terrible dream. Then reality settled back into place, and he remembered. Rachel. He found her at the kitchen counter. Maya's homework spread out in front of her. She'd made coffee, and the apartment smelled like the good kind, not the bitter stuff he usually rushed through in the mornings. "You're up early," he said quietly. "Habit. And I didn't want to overstay my welcome." She gestured to Maya's math worksheet. "I hope it's okay. She forgot to carry the 1 on a few problems." David looked at the paper. Rachel's corrections were made in pencil, gentle and encouraging. Small stars drawn next to the problems Maya had gotten right. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. It's been a while since I got to help a kid with homework." Something in her voice made David look at her more carefully. She'd showered, he could smell his shampoo in her hair, and she was wearing one of his old Stanford t-shirts over her jeans. The clothes fit reasonably well, and she looked normal, like someone who belonged in his kitchen, drinking his coffee, helping his daughter with math. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months. Your couch is very comfortable." "Good." David poured himself coffee, aware of the strange intimacy of this morning routine. "Maya will be up soon. She's not exactly what you'd call a late sleeper. I remember being like that when I was her age. My mother used to say I woke up excited about the day before I even knew what was in it." "What happened to that?" Rachel was quiet for a moment, staring into her coffee. "Life, I guess. You learn that being excited about the day can be dangerous if you don't know what's coming." "Is that what you've learned?" "Among other things." Maya's voice carried from her bedroom, awake and chattering to her stuffed animals about the day ahead. David felt that familiar rush of love and responsibility. "Rachel. About last night. I know. It was a one-time thing. I should probably get going before Maya wakes up. It'll be easier for her if I just disappear." The words hit David harder than he'd expected. "Is that what you want?" "What I want isn't really the point. Maybe it should be." Before Rachel could respond, Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway, her hair wild with sleep, dragging her favorite blanket behind her. "Rachel, you stayed." "I did, but I should probably. Did you see? Daddy made pancakes yesterday, and there are still some in the fridge, and we could heat them up. And Maya stopped, seeming to sense the tension in the room. Are you leaving? David watched Rachel's face as she looked at his daughter. The careful walls she'd built seemed to crack slightly. I thought I should. But why? Did we do something wrong? No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Then why are you leaving? The question hung in the air. David found himself holding his breath, waiting for Rachel's answer. Because sometimes adults make things complicated when they don't need to be. Rachel said finally. Maya considered this with 8-year-old seriousness. Are you making things complicated? Maybe. Then maybe you should stop. David felt something warm spread through his chest. Maya, why don't you get dressed for school? Rachel and I need to talk. After Maya disappeared back down the hall, Rachel turned to David. She's going to get attached if I stay. She's already attached. That's what I'm afraid of. Why? Rachel set down her coffee cup, her hands careful and precise. Because I don't know what happens next. Because I've been sleeping on the street for months, and people like me don't just get to have normal lives again. Because Maya deserves stability, not someone who could disappear at any moment. Who says you could disappear? Reality, experience, the fact that I don't have a job or an apartment or any kind of foundation to build on. David studied her face. Beneath the rational arguments, he could see fear, raw and honest. What if we built something? Together. Built what? I don't know yet. But yesterday you had ideas about an app that could actually help people. Real solutions to real problems. What if we started there? Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly. You want to offer me a job. I want to offer you a partnership. David, you don't understand. Then help me understand. Tell me what I'm missing. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with something David couldn't see. I was good at my job, she said finally. Really good. I loved those kids, and I thought I was making a difference. And then, one day it was all gone because I tried to do the right thing. She paused. I don't know how to trust that it won't happen again. You can't know that. But you can't live your whole life afraid of it either. Can't I? Maya reappeared, dressed for school but moving with unusual slowness. She stood in the kitchen doorway, watching them. Are you fighting? She asked quietly. No, sweetheart, David said. We're just talking about grown-up stuff. About Rachel leaving? David looked at Rachel, who was staring at her hands. Yeah. Maya walked over to Rachel and climbed into her lap without invitation. Rachel's arms came around her, automatically, protectively. I don't want you to leave, Maya said simply. I know. Then don't. It's not that simple. Why not? Rachel was quiet for a long moment, her chin resting on the top of Maya's head. Because I'm scared, she said finally. Of what? Of lots of things. Of not being good enough. Of letting you down. Of getting comfortable, and then having it all disappear again. Maya turned in Rachel's lap to look at her directly. My mommy used to say that being scared just means something is important to you. David felt his throat tighten. It was something Sarah had said, usually when Maya was afraid of trying something new. Your mommy was very smart, Rachel said softly. She also said that the best way to not be scared is to do the thing with people who love you. Maya, Rachel's voice was careful. I love you, Rachel. And Daddy likes you. I can tell because he smiles different when you're here. David felt heat rise in his cheeks, but Maya wasn't wrong. There was something about Rachel's presence that made the apartment feel less empty. Less like they were just going through the motions of living. What kind of different? Rachel asked, and David could hear the careful control in her voice. Like he used to smile when Mommy was here. Not pretend happy, but real happy. The observation hit David like a physical blow. He hadn't realized how much of his emotional life had been performance since Sarah died, putting on happiness for Maya's sake, going through the motions of normalcy. Rachel looked at him over Maya's head, her green eyes searching. Is that true? David thought about lying, about deflecting with humor, or changing the subject. Instead, he found himself being honest. Yeah, it island. Something shifted in Rachel's expression. The careful walls cracked a little further. "I don't know how to do this," she said quietly. "Do what?" "Be part of a family again. Be responsible for someone else's happiness." "You're not responsible for our happiness," David said. "But you could share it. If you wanted to." Maya slid off Rachel's lap and stood between them, looking back and forth, like a tiny mediator. "Can Rachel come with us to school?" she asked. "I want to show her my classroom." David looked at Rachel. "What do you think? Want to see where Maya spends her days?" For a moment, Rachel looked like she might say no. Then something in her face softened. "Yeah, I'd like that." The walk to school was different, with 3 of them. Maya skipped between David and Rachel, chattering about her teacher and her friends, the science project she was working on. Rachel listened with the kind of attention David remembered from good teachers, engaged, curious, asking follow-up questions that made Maya think deeper about her answers. At the school gates, Maya turned to Rachel. "Will you be here when school's over?" Rachel looked at David, then back at Maya. "Do you want me to be?" "Yes." "Then yes, I'll be here." Maya beamed and ran toward the building, turning back once to wave. "You realize what you just promised," David said as they watched her disappear into the crowd of children. "To pick up an 8-year-old from school. People do it every day. To be part of her life. That's different." Rachel was quiet as they walked back toward downtown. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "Tell me about this app idea. Really, what would it look like?" David felt something shift between them, a movement away from the personal and towards something they could both handle. "I've been thinking about what you said, about mapping resources for people experiencing homelessness. What if we built something comprehensive? Not just food and shelter, but services, support, connection. It would need to be updated constantly. Resources change, places close, policies shift. So we build it with community input. Let users update information in real time." Rachel nodded slowly. "And it would need to be accessible on basic phones, not just smartphones. A lot of people living rough have phones, but not necessarily the latest models. SMS interface, web-based platform that works on any device." They'd reached the coffee shop, where they'd had breakfast the day before. Without discussing it, they both stopped. "Want to grab some coffee and talk about this more?" David asked. "I don't have money for Rachel." She looked at him, and he could see her internal struggle, pride warring with pragmatism. "Right. Partners. You're buying coffee to discuss business." "Exactly." Inside, they found a table by the window. David bought coffee and pastries while Rachel pulled out a small notebook he hadn't seen before. It was filled with her neat handwriting observations, ideas, sketches of interfaces. "You've been thinking about this for a while," he said, looking at the pages. "Since about a week after I ended up on the street. You realize very quickly how scattered and inefficient the existing resources are. For the next 2 hours, they worked." Rachel described the gaps she'd experienced, the way services were siloed, how finding information required, knowing exactly what questions to ask and where to ask them. David sketched technical solutions, ways to integrate data, user experience flows that would work for people in crisis. "The hardest part," Rachel said, "is that people experiencing homelessness are already exhausted. They don't have energy to navigate complicated systems or fill out endless forms. Everything needs to be simple, immediate. What about privacy? People in vulnerable situations need to know their information is safe. Anonymous usage. No accounts required unless someone specifically wants to save information." David was taking notes, his mind racing with possibilities. This felt different from his other projects, urgent in a way that had nothing to do with market share or profit margins. How would we fund it? Grants maybe? There's foundation money for social impact technology. What about staffing? Rachel looked at him carefully. Are you serious about this? Really? I think so. Are you? I think so too. They looked at each other across the table. And David felt something settle between them, an understanding that this was more than just a conversation. "I have a meeting with my lawyer next week," David said, "about restructuring my company. I could ask him about setting up a nonprofit arm." "David, you don't have to." "I want to. But I need you to help me do it right. I need someone who understands the problems we're trying to solve." Rachel was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. If we do this, I need to know it's not charity. I need to know I'm here because you think I can actually contribute something." "Rachel, in 2 hours you've described problems I never knew existed and sketched solutions I never would have thought of. You're not charity. You're exactly what this project needs." "And Maya? What happens with Maya?" David thought about his daughter's face that morning, the easy way she'd climbed into Rachel's lap. Maya gets to be part of something that matters. She gets to see that problems can be solved, that people can help each other. He paused. And she gets to keep someone she's already decided to love. Rachel's eyes were bright, and David realized she was fighting tears again. "I'm scared," she said quietly. "So am I. But Maya's right, being scared just means it's important." Rachel nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Okay, yes. Let's do this. Partners? Partners." They shook hands across the table, and David felt something shift in his understanding of his life. 3 days ago, his world had been careful, controlled, predictable. Now he was starting a nonprofit with a woman he'd met on the street, restructuring his family around someone Maya had fallen in love with at first sight. It should have felt terrifying. Instead, it felt like waking up. "We should go pick up Maya," Rachel said, checking the time. "She's going to be so excited." "About the app?" "About you staying. About us doing something that matters." David paused. "About having someone else who thinks she's worth listening to." As they walked toward the school, David felt his phone buzz with messages, meetings he was missing, calls he needed to return, the careful structure of his professional life demanding attention. For the first time in years, he ignored them all. 6 months later, David stood in the converted warehouse space that had become their office, watching Rachel present their beta platform to a room full of social workers, nonprofit leaders, and city officials. She moved through the demonstration with quiet confidence, her voice steady as she explained how someone could find emergency shelter, locate a free clinic, or connect with a caseworker all within 3 taps on any phone. "The key insight," Rachel was saying, "is that people in crisis don't have time to navigate complicated systems. They need immediate, accurate information about what's available right now, today." David caught Maya's eye from across the room. She was supposed to be at her after-school program, but she'd convinced them to let her come to the presentation. She sat in the back row, wearing the technical consultant badge Rachel had made for her, taking notes in her careful third-grade handwriting. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of legal paperwork, grant applications, and late nights coding. David had restructured his company, setting up the nonprofit arm with initial funding that made his accountant nervous but felt right in his chest. Rachel had moved into the spare bedroom that had been David's office, transforming it into a combination workspace and sanctuary filled with books and plants, and the kind of organized calm that spoke of hard-won peace. Maya had adapted to their new configuration with the easy acceptance of childhood, though David knew it was more than that. She'd needed Rachel in ways he was still learning to understand. The careful attention, the patient answers to endless questions, the way Rachel never talked down to her or dismissed her ideas. "Questions?" Rachel asked the room. A woman in the front row, David recognized her as the director of the downtown shelter, raised her hand. "This looks incredible, but I have to ask, how sustainable is this? What happens when the initial funding runs out?" It was the question David had been expecting, the one that kept him awake some nights, staring at budget projections and wondering if he was being naive. Rachel didn't hesitate. "We're already in talks with 3 major foundations about ongoing support," And we're developing a fee-for-service model for organizations that want premium features, data, analytics, integration with existing case management systems. The core platform will always be free, but we can generate revenue from value-added services. David felt a flush of pride. 6 months ago, Rachel had been sleeping on the street. Now she was speaking the language of sustainable social enterprise, with the fluency of someone who'd found her calling. After the presentation, as people filtered out, David found himself standing next to Tom Martinez, the city's new homeless services coordinator. "She's impressive," Tom said, nodding toward Rachel. "Where did you find her?" David thought about the true answer on a sidewalk corner, wrapped in a blanket, sharing granola bars with his daughter. Instead, he said, "She found us." "Well, however it happened, you're lucky to have her. This platform could change how we deliver services in this city." After everyone left, the three of them sat in the empty conference room, surrounded by the detritus of a successful presentation: empty coffee cups, scattered papers, Maya's drawings of what she called the helping app. "That went well," David said. "Better than well," Rachel corrected. "Tom Martinez wants to pilot the platform with all city services." The shelter director asked about expanding to include job training resources. "And did you see the woman from the Gates Foundation taking notes?" Maya looked up from her drawing. "Are we going to be famous?" "I don't think so, kiddo," David said. "But we might help a lot of people." "Good. That's better than famous." Rachel laughed, the sound easy and unguarded in a way that still surprised David sometimes. The careful walls she'd built around herself had come down gradually over the months, replaced by something more open, more trusting. "What are you drawing?" Rachel asked, moving to look over Maya's shoulder. "It's you and Daddy and me. But we're superheroes. See? You have a cape that helps people find houses. And Daddy has a computer that solves problems, and I have magic granola bars that make people feel better." David studied the picture: three stick figures, with elaborate costumes and big smiles, standing in front of what looked like a city full of hearts. "I like it," he said. "What's our superhero name?" "Team Helpers," Maya said without hesitation. "Team Helpers," Rachel repeated, smiling. "I can live with that." As they cleaned up the conference room, David found himself watching Rachel and Maya work together. Maya chattering about her day at school, while Rachel listened with the kind of focused attention that made children feel heard. It had become their routine, this end-of-day decompression, and David realized he couldn't imagine their life without it anymore. The realization should have scared him. For 2 years after Sarah's death, he'd been careful not to let anyone get too close, too important. The possibility of loss had felt too dangerous to risk again. But watching Rachel help Maya stack chairs, listening to their easy conversation, David felt something he'd almost forgotten. The particular contentment that came from being part of something larger than himself. "Daddy?" Maya's voice broke through his reverie. "Can we get pizza for dinner? To celebrate?" "Pizza sounds perfect." They walked home through the early evening light, Maya skipping between them as she had that first morning 6 months ago. But everything else had changed. Rachel no longer carried everything she owned in a backpack. Maya no longer went to bed worried about cold strangers on sidewalks. And David no longer felt like he was just going through the motions of living. At the pizza place, a neighborhood joint that had become their regular spot, they found their usual booth. Maya immediately started working on the kids' activity placemat, while David and Rachel reviewed the day's feedback. "The foundation contact wants to set up a meeting next week," Rachel said, scrolling through emails on her phone. "And there are 3 more cities interested in pilot programs." "That's good. That's really good." "It Island," Rachel paused. "Sometimes I can't believe this is real." "What do you mean?" 6 months ago I was sleeping in doorways. Now I'm running presentations for city officials and talking to foundation program officers." She shook her head. "It doesn't feel possible." David studied her face. "Do you miss it? Teaching, I mean?" "Sometimes. I loved working with kids that age, helping them discover they were smarter than they thought. She glanced at Maya, who was now drawing elaborate mazes on her placemat. But this feels bigger somehow. More systemic. And you get to help Maya discover she's smarter than she thinks. Rachel's smile was soft. Maya already knows she's smart. She just needed adults who would listen to her ideas. The pizza arrived, and they fell into comfortable conversation, Maya describing the science experiment her class was planning, Rachel sharing feedback from the afternoon's presentation, David talking through logistics for the next week's foundation meetings. It was ordinary. Beautifully, perfectly ordinary in the way that family dinners should be. After dinner, as they walked home, Maya slipped her hand into Rachel's. "Rachel? Yeah? Are you happy?" The question was so direct, so purely Maya, that David found himself holding his breath for the answer. Rachel stopped walking and crouched down to Maya's level. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm very happy." "Good. Because I was worried that maybe you were still sad about the mean people who said you couldn't be a teacher anymore." David saw Rachel's expression tighten slightly. They'd told Maya a simplified version of what had happened, but children were perceptive about the things adults tried to protect them from. "I am still sad about that sometimes," Rachel said carefully. "But I'm also happy about new things. About helping people in a different way. About being part of your family." "Are you part of our family?" The question hung in the air between them. David felt his heart rate speed up, waiting for Rachel's answer. "I think so," Rachel said finally. "If that's okay with you." "It's very okay with me." Maya threw her arms around Rachel's neck. "I love you. I love you too, Maya." David watched this exchange, feeling something warm and complicated settle in his chest. Love. The word Rachel had said so easily, the truth Maya had stated, with characteristic directness. When had that happened? When had affection and gratitude and partnership transformed into something deeper? He thought about the morning 3 weeks ago when Rachel had woken up early to help Maya with a school project. The two of them bent over poster board at the kitchen table, talking quietly to avoid waking him. About the evening last month when he'd come home from a difficult investor meeting to find Rachel making his favorite dinner. Somehow knowing he'd had a hard day, without him saying anything. About the night 2 weeks ago, when Maya had a nightmare, and called for Rachel instead of him, and how right it had felt. Hearing Rachel's voice in the hallway, soothing and certain. They were a family. Somehow, without any formal decision or conversation, they'd become a family. Back at the apartment, Maya settled into her bedtime routine, while David and Rachel cleaned up the day's scattered papers and coffee cups. They moved around each other with practiced ease, a domestic choreography that had developed without conscious effort. "David?" Rachel's voice was quiet. "Yeah? Thank you. For today, for the presentation, for believing in this project." She paused. "For everything. You don't need to thank me. We're partners, remember? I don't just mean the work. I mean," she gestured vaguely around the apartment. "This, home, family. The chance to start over." David set down the papers he'd been organizing and looked at her directly. "Rachel, you didn't just get a chance to start over. You made one. You took what happened to you, something that would have broken a lot of people, and turned it into a way to help others. I had help. We all need help. The difference is, you knew how to accept it when it came." Rachel was quiet for a moment, something working across her face. "When Maya asked if I was part of your family." "Yeah? Is that what this is? A family?" David felt his throat tighten. It was the conversation they'd been dancing around for months, the definition neither of them had been brave enough to name. "What do you think?" "I think Maya calls me when she has bad dreams. I think you text me when you're having a hard day at work. I think we fight about whose turn it is to buy groceries, and worry about each other when someone's late coming home." She paused. "I think that's what families do." "Rachel, I'm not asking for anything," she said quickly. "I'm not trying to replace Sarah, or push for something that isn't there. I want you to know that this means everything to me. You and Maya. This life we've built together. It means everything. David felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking, but expanding. Room for more love, more hope, more possibility than he'd thought he could handle. Sarah would have loved you, he said quietly. You think? I know. She would have loved your stubbornness, and your integrity, and the way you listen to Maya like her opinions matter. She would have loved watching you turn your experience into something that helps other people. Rachel's eyes were bright. I wish I could have met her. In some ways, you have. She's in Maya's sense of justice, in the way she sees people who are hurting and wants to help. She's in the values we've tried to build this family around. This family, Rachel repeated softly. Yeah, this family. Maya's voice called from her bedroom. Daddy, Rachel, I'm ready for stories. They looked at each other and smiled. Coming, kiddo, David called back. As they walked down the hall toward Maya's room, Rachel reached for David's hand. Her fingers were warm, steady, sure. Thank you, she said again. For what? For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For teaching Maya that helping people isn't complicated. For showing me that families can grow in unexpected ways. David squeezed her hand. Thank you for teaching us how to be brave. In Maya's room, they settled into their routine. David on one side of the bed, Rachel on the other. Maya between them with her current favorite book. As Rachel read aloud, her voice gentle and sure, David felt the particular peace that came from being exactly where he belonged. Outside, the city hummed its nighttime song. Somewhere out there, people were using their app to find safe places to sleep, warm meals, resources they needed to survive. Tomorrow, there would be more presentations, more meetings, more chances to make the system work better for people who needed it most. But for now, there was this. Maya's sleepy questions about the story, Rachel's patient answers, the sound of rain against the windows of their warm home. When Maya finally fell asleep, David and Rachel sat in the living room, reviewing notes for the next day's meetings. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft sound of Maya's breathing from down the hall. David? Do you ever think about the night we met? About how random it was? David looked up from his laptop. Random? Maya deciding to give away her granola bar. You agreeing to let her. Me being brave enough to accept help from strangers. Rachel shook her head. If any one thing had been different, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be here. David thought about the chain of small choices that had led them to this moment. Maya's compassion, his willingness to follow her lead, Rachel's courage in trusting them. Maybe it wasn't random, he said. Maybe it was just time. Time for what? Time for us to find each other. Time for Maya to teach us both how to see people who need help. Time for you to turn your experience into something that could change things for others. Rachel smiled. Time for a workaholic CEO to remember that the most important problems aren't always the most profitable ones to solve. That too. They worked in comfortable silence until Rachel closed her laptop and were stretched. I should get some sleep. Early morning tomorrow. Rachel? She paused at the hallway entrance, looking back at him. I'm glad Maya saw you that night. I'm glad she thought you looked cold. I was cold? Rachel said softly. In more ways than one. And now? Now I'm warm. In every way that matters. After Rachel went to bed, David sat alone in the living room, thinking about the strange geography of love, how it could expand to include people you'd never expected, how loss could make room for different kinds of wholeness. On the coffee table, Maya's drawing from the afternoon lay where she'd left it. Team helpers, the three of them with their elaborate superhero costumes, standing in front of a city full of hearts. David picked up the drawing and studied it more closely. In Maya's careful 8-year-old handwriting, she'd written at the bottom, "Sometimes the best families are the ones you choose." David smiled, folding the paper carefully and tucking it into his laptop bag. Tomorrow, he would frame it and hang it in their office, next to the certificates and awards and formal recognition that would undoubtedly come. But tonight, he simply sat in the quiet of his home, listening to the sound of the people he loved, sleeping safely down the hall, and felt grateful for the weight of small gestures that had somehow added up to everything. If you enjoy this story, I want you to click the subscribe button for more stories like this. This will mean a lot for the channel. Thank you.